Well, thank you very much for coming to listen to the talk. This is work done by myself and my colleague who can't be here today, Dr. El-Sadat, who's a consultant to the care of the elderly. I'm told many times that Powys is different. On this occasion, I might be inclined to agree. Normally, you identify a clinical problem and you try and introduce a nationally recognized safety measure to address it. We've been given a nationally recognized safety measure, the National Early Warning System, and we try to find problems with it. We've tried to break it because it was never designed for a community hospital setting. It was designed for acute care. And our situation in Powys is a little different. We have 10 community hospitals. Our smallest hospital, not smallest ward, smallest hospital has 6 beds. Largest one has about 26, occasionally 30 beds. Mainly, it is an elderly clientele, median age 79. Clients who come in for assessment and for rehabilitation post-surgery outside of Powys. Half of the beds are under GP care. We have no outreach teams. We have no critical care. We have no resident 24-hour medical cover. In fact, our out-of-hours medical cover is an out-of-hours GP service, not necessarily an out-of-hours hospital service. However, we did have experience of developing early warning systems. And my colleague Dr. Dunn was responsible for developing one called Track and Trigger, published in the nursing journals as part of the original 1,000 Lives campaign, which we had specially tailored for our older clientele. We were enthusiastic about using the national system because it gives that commonality of communication, but we were concerned. And our 2 main concerns were, will it actually work with the type of patients we have? And given that we don't have a massive training department, how will we get our long-suffering nursing staff and our long-suffering medical staff to accept it quickly and efficiently? So, first question, does it work? Now this is my blobogram. What we basically did was take about 350 patients and their observations who had been through our wards, who we knew the fate of, and on the bottom was how they'd scored with our existing Track and Trigger observation. And we rescored their observations using news. So what do we find? Okay, the vertical line up to 4 is what we would regard as sick under our original Track and Trigger. The horizontal line at 6 is what is regarded as 6 under the new news system. And good news in terms of this quadrant here, sort of 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, both systems agreed patients were sick, and this section here, sort of 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, there was agreement that patients weren't sick. Interesting one here. This was someone who was picked up as being very poorly. 6 on our old system is extremely poorly, but actually was under the threshold on the news, and I'll come back to that one. Slightly more concerning was the greater sensitivity of the news. We got more people scoring which were previously unscored. Interestingly enough, people who had actually scored 0, no action of any kind, occasionally, very occasionally, would come 10. The size of the disc indicates how many cases that was true for. So this would maybe be 1 patient, this could be 25, the larger disc. Bearing in mind our situation in Powys, the lack of resident medical cover, the lack of outreach nurses, a bigger interest of ours was what do you do at the lower levels of triggering? Now the suggestion originally from these was anything over a score of 2 should have enhanced observations, going to say observation every hourly. Our equivalent under Track and Trigger was 3, and since 4 is actually the sick trigger, it's actually only these observations under our original score that would attract extra observations. You can see though with the news, there's very rapidly a large number 3, a large number 4, reasonable number of 5, and we rapidly calculated that there would be a 15-fold increase in observations if we followed the guidelines of hourly observations to a score of 3. 2 things worried us there. One, it would mean our nursing staff would be running around from patient to patient doing observations and probably being more careful with them. And secondly, how do we actually be under observation, under observing our patients in the past? To answer this question, we took the same patients who we knew had been through our system. So this would be, if you like, a typical example of Howie's patient. An elderly patient had some fairly significant surgery, but would come back to Powys medically stable for a bit of TLC. This had been their stay, and this was the genuine stay over time. These were the observation points under track and trigger. And we discovered actually there'd been no triggers at all, and eventually they'd been discharged back home successfully. We rescored that individual's patient journey, if you like, and we discovered that the green indicates that there would be an enhanced observation, so that would be either a score of 3 or 4. So under news, we'd be encouraged to have pretty negative observations. And in fact, there was one orange. There was one time there was 6. Going back through the notes, because this was a retrospective analysis, the gentleman suffering a bit of discomfort, a bit of pain, got a little bit agitated and worried about this. So this had generated the trigger. And we did this for a large number of patients, and we were able to get a feeling of how the system would work. And catch up with the results of that at the end. The other part of this, of course, was the implementation. How do we actually get ours down to fill out these forms and fill out a smorgasbord of observation charts. Oops, my apologies. The one on the end here, this was our original track and trigger. Essentially a bog standard TPR chart with a table at the bottom. We had a challenge, and it was purely a design challenge. The news system has 2 extra scoring criteria: whether the patient has oxygen and what their SATs are. So we needed more space. The form didn't have any more space. But it was also an opportunity. I never really liked having a table here because it puts an extra step in the process. You have to, the nursing staff plot the observation, then they have to work out, oh, I've scored 99 on my systolic blood pressure, therefore I should be scoring 1, and then they have to add it to a table. And it adds more work and it adds more steps where mistakes can be made. So we came up with 4 different designs, which we offered to our brave nurses on our pilot board who acted as our guinea pigs. Some slightly different, some radically different. We went from the very conservative, in which we just shoved everything in and the kitchen sink, which made it. We went to the ultra radical, in which we actually did away with the graphing aspects and just had category boxes. So did you fall into this category, this category? I knew they would like that. And then we sort of played with things in between. Very rapidly, we decided on colour coding. The colour coding because we didn't want to have a look-up chart or a look-up credit card. We wanted the staff who wrote in a coloured box to go, action. We played with the colours under a number of different screens. The green actually one, we originally had green, amber, red. You know, one of the comments came back, oh, patient was fine, the score was in the green. Actually, green in this case meant the first level of trigger. So we realised there was a lot of sort of semantic baggage that if you had green, you know, you thought that was okay. So this is why we ended up with the more pastel colour at the end. It also makes it easy to fax to an out-of-hours service, because if you have red, it doesn't be right on black, it doesn't fax well to an out-of-hours service. We had 4. We got the feedback. This was our PDSA cycle work, and eventually we came up with a 5. And the Form 5 itself has now gone through 9 different versions of the form. Bravest thing I think we did was we took out diastolic blood pressure as a chart, because this just made it confusing. It would always be in the area of which was scoring systolic. And actually, in the type of environment we have, diastolic blood pressure is not that big an indicator. We also put in, as I said, the coloured marks, and we also sort of cheerfully stole from other organisations, which I'll acknowledge on our last slide. So, pulling the different aspects together, will it work for a community hospital? Yes. We're absolutely convinced now that a score of 3 has no relevance, though, to an older client. everyone we've seen so far has been absolutely stable. At this time, we thought a score of 4 was not particularly significant. We're collecting the data post-implementation. We have a system set up where the wards can just scan in a chart that they think is interesting, and it goes to a central folder we can have a look at. We're actually now not particularly convinced 4 is significant either. We see very few patients gaps. It's clear for 5 and 6 we're beginning to be happy with. This comes to the howevers. We have many patients who are as stable as you can expect them to be, who can score 7. These are the old miners from Astragonlice who have serious respiratory disease. The news matrix is very respiratory biased, and it does easily generate big scores for people who have respiratory problems. Interesting that the feedback from our clinicians has been it's still useful, because these clients, although we're not expecting them to die today or this week, they're still actually sick. They're still actually quite poorly individuals. And it does prompt the doctors to begin to have those conversations about the patient's long-term wishes, whether they wish to be resuscitated. If they deteriorate more, do they want a long ambulance ride out of Paris for what might be a fairly futile further treatment? The spot that I pointed out earlier on in the slides is interesting. That was a patient who had sepsis. Because of the bias of the scoring matrix and the fact that older patients don't always mount a very high temperature response to sepsis, we've seen now 2 patients in sepsis who scored 5 on this, who would not prompt actions of a review in an hour, which, as we all know, is too long. What we've done, therefore, we won't be able to read it, but on this line here is that we put a strap line on the actual chart saying if the patient's temperature is above that, consider it a sepsis and get medical advice. And we're continuing to collect data. The form development, I think, has been a really great opportunity to work with colleagues throughout Wales. The 2 Chris's, Chris Hancock and Chris Soubey, who were supporting the 1,000 Lives work, have done a marvellous job in getting all the organisations together. And it was very interesting how we sort of worked off each other throughout the course of the development over a relatively short time frame. So we had both the internal development of the forms and the actions, and then interactions across Wales. And so we were the first people to suggest using colour coding, and a lot of organisations, I think most organisations now have taken that on board. The removal of the diastolic as a graph, most organisations have accepted. We cheerfully stole from, I think it was our colleagues in Betsy Cadwell, the idea of having an accept box, that we would still score, but if you had chronic respiratory disease, you could accept score of 4 because of what you were getting there. And it's generated a lot of interest from colleagues from the larger health boards, who nonetheless have community hospitals, and other places like, interestingly, the prison service. The comment was, we don't like to sort of compare the people of Paris to prisoners, but it's actually, removing from your normal place of residence is significant in both our cases. So it's been an interesting journey, and we're continuing to collect our data. And it's inspired us as well to think about sepsis training for our staff. Sepsis is not a common issue in a community hospital, but because of that it's perhaps more important, because they're less used to it. Help is a long way away, and we need to start thinking about maybe not sepsis 6, but sepsis 4.5 perhaps, whilst the applicants come. Thank you very much.
Okay, questions?
I guess this is totally dependent on the people collecting this data, which is the nursing staff looking after the patient. Is that after these patients? Is that correct?
It is a mixture of staff actually. It's sometimes the nursing staff. It's in some ways some of our healthcare assistants are quite interested in this as a quality project as part of their own development and training. In a couple of the wards, it's the water clerks, the helping staff.
So if you've got a measure that you've been using for quite a long time, did you find some resistance from people to change to a different one because they had confidence in something?
Absolutely. The tracker trigger that we were using is a very black and white tool. Because we didn't want people moved out of county, and people knew where they were to some extent. It was like yes, no. Whereas here, it's a case much more thought is needed. More thought is perhaps needed by the nursing staff over what is meant, which is why we're building into the training we have. We've, as an initial step, put in a PowerPoint slides where different scenarios are suggested and discussed. With the people who provide our resuscitation training, we're also building into that as an indication of news is different. We're going to get higher scores. Is it significant? So it's actually more focusing on has the patient changed over time? Is this a different presentation to what it was last week? Having said that, there's not been opposition to it. People know it's a national measure. They like the fact that Wrong Eyes Hospital or Neville Hall can ring up and say we would like to transfer a patient back into Paris, and we can say, well, what are they scoring on NICS? And they'll say, oh well, they're 6. No. We can't have that. So it gives that commonality of language. It gives commonality of language to the out-of-hours service also. And so I think we are aware that there are negatives to it, but we also see there are a lot of positives.
Has it led to more transfers out of Powys?
Yes.
How significantly?
We're still capturing engagement on that. That's one of the things we're looking at. It has, two things we've looked at is numbers of deaths, overall deaths. That is going down. The number of transfers there is going up. The biggest and most interesting question, of course, and what would be utterly tragic is if we have patients transferred out of the county only to die the next day. And that's the next stage of this project, which is why it's actually not over yet. We're still to collect data. We need to get that confidence that when we are transferring patients, it is for benefit of the body. I think that's a very good point. There is a great sensitivity. We have seen in the early stages a small increase, but a notable increase.
And sorry, can I ask you vice versa? Has it led to a higher sensitivity of people getting back into Powys then, because as you mentioned, they're having higher numbers?
It hasn't noticeably.
Okay, time for one more question.